Hello, my friends. So today we'll talk about surrender and how messengers of death can also be messengers of life. So surrender is, number one, full attention. Number two, appreciation of life's riches. Number three, opening yourself to what is in front of you right now, here. Number four, non-judgment. Number five, absence of ego. Number six, humility. Number seven, being receptive to all possibilities. And number eight, most important, allowing love. Most people think of surrender as a difficult, if not impossible act. It connotes surrender to God, which few except the most saintly seem to manage. How can one tell that the act of surrender has happened? I'm doing this for God sounds inspiring, but a video camera in the corner of the room couldn't tell the difference between an act performed for God and the same act performed without God in mind, or the divine in mind. It's much easier to do the surrendering on your own and let God show up if he or she wants. Open yourself up to a Rembrandt or a Monet painting, which is, after all, as glorious a piece of creation as there is. Pay full attention to it. Appreciate the depth of the image and the care in its execution. Open yourself up to what is in front of you rather than allowing yourself to be distracted. Don't judge in advance that you have to like the painting because you've been told it's great. Don't force yourself to respond because it makes you look smart or sensitive. Let the painting be the center of your focus. By the way, you can do this with any object. Any object. So when an object is being fully paid attention to, that is the essence of humility. Be receptive to any reaction you may have. If all these steps of surrender are present, then a great Rembrandt or Monet will evoke love because the artist is simply there in all his or her naked humanity. By the way, if you do this with any object, I'm taking another object here, any object. When you see presence or feel presence in the object, that's called beauty. And when you feel that same presence in another sentient being, it's called love. In the presence of such humility, surrender isn't difficult. People find themselves struggling when asked to surrender. Yet surrendering to someone else follows the same steps as surrendering to yourself. Just the next time you sit down to dinner with your family, you might decide to concentrate on just one step of surrender, such as paying full attention or being totally non-judgmental. Pick the step that seems easiest to approach, or better yet, the one that you know you've been leaving out. Most of us have left out humility when we relate to our families. What does it mean to be humble with a child, for example? It means regarding the child's opinion as equal to your own. At the level of awareness, it is equal. Your advantage of years as the parent at the table doesn't discount that fact. We all had to be children, and we all thought back then that all the weight and importance of life at any age fell on us, perhaps more so. The secret of surrender is that you do it inside without trying to please anyone. As much as it disturbs us, eventually we all find ourselves in the presence of someone who is very old, frail, or perhaps dying. The same steps of surrender are possible in that situation. If you follow them, the beauty of a dying person is just as evident as the beauty of a Rembrandt. Death inspires a certain wonder that can be reached when you go beyond the knee-jerk reaction of fear. I recently felt this sense of wonder when I came across a phenomenon in biology that is called apoptosis. And apoptosis is programmed cellular death. Programmed cellular death. Let me explain what that really means, okay? Programmed cellular death. So, programmed cellular death helps support the whole notion that death is completely wedded to life. It turns out that our bodies have found the key to surrender already. This phenomenon is called apoptosis, as I just mentioned, programmed cellular death. This strange word, which was completely new to me at one time, takes one on a deeply mystical journey. And having returned from that journey, I find my perceptions of life and death have changed. Punching apoptosis on the internet, if you Google it, on the search engine, gave me 357 entries. And the very first defined the word in biblical terms. For every cell, there is a time to live and a time to die. For every cell, there is a time to live and a time to die. Apoptosis is programmed cellular death. And although we don't realize it, each of us has been dying every day, right on schedule, in order to remain alive. Cells die because they want to. The cell carefully reverses the birth process. It shrinks, it destroys its basic proteins, and then it goes on to dismantle its own DNA. Bubbles appear on the surface of the membrane as the cell opens its portals to the outside world and expels every vital chemical to finally be swallowed up by the body's white cells, exactly as they would devour an invading microbe. When the process is complete, the cell has dissolved and leaves no trace behind. When you read this graphic account of a cell sacrificing itself so methodically, you can't help but being touched. Yet the mystical part is still to come. Apoptosis isn't a way to get rid of sick or old cells, as you might suppose. The process gave us birth. As embryos in the womb, each of us passed through primitive stages of development when we had a tadpole tail, fish-like gills, webbing between our fingers, and most surprisingly, too many brain cells. Apoptosis took care of these unwanted vestiges. In the case of the brain, a newborn baby forms proper neural connections by removing the excess brain tissue that we are all born with. It came as a surprise when neurologists or neuroscientists discovered that our brains contain the most cells at birth, a number which gets whittled down by the millions so that higher intelligence can force its delicate web of connections. So I've said this before, but your brain is created by genes and sculpted by experience. It was long thought that killing off brain cells was a pathological process associated with aging. Now the whole issue must be reconsidered. Apoptosis doesn't end in the womb, however. Our bodies continue to thrive on death. The immune cells that engulf and consume invading bacteria would turn on the body's own tissues if they didn't induce death in each other, and in turn on themselves with the same poisons used against invaders. Whenever any cell detects its DNA damaged or defective, it knows that the body will suffer if this defect is passed on. Fortunately, every cell carries a protein gene known as P53 that can be activated to make itself die. Of course, the name P53 is given by scientists as a construct for this phenomenon. These few facts barely scratch the surface. Anatomists long ago knew that skin cells die every few days, that retinal cells, red blood cells, and stomach cells die also. They're programmed with specific short lifespans so that their tissues can be quickly replenished. Each dies for its own unique reason. Skin cells have to be sloughed off so that our skin remains supple, while stomach cells die as part of the potent chemical combustion that digests food. Death cannot be our enemy if we have depended upon it from the womb. Consider the following irony. As it turns out, the body is capable of taking a vacation from death by producing cells that decide to live forever. These cells don't trigger p53 when they detect defects in their own DNA. And by refusing to issue their own death warrants, these cells divide relentlessly and invasively. Cancer, the most feared of diseases, is the body's vacation from death, while programmed cellular death is its ticket to life. Isn't that an interesting paradox? This is the paradox of life and death confronted head-on. The mystical notion of dying every day turns out to be the body's most concrete fact. What this means is that we are exquisitely sensitive to the balance of positive and negative forces. And when the balance is tipped, death is the natural response. Nietzsche once remarked that humans are the only creatures who must be encouraged to stay alive. He couldn't have known that this is literally true. Literally true. Cells receive both positive signals that tell them to stay alive, chemicals called growth factors, but they also receive negative signals. If these positive signals are withdrawn, the cell loses its will to live. Like the mafia's kiss of death, the cell can also be sent messengers that bind to its outer receptors to signal that death has arrived. These chemical messengers are actually known as death activators. Months after I wrote these notes and put them in the Book of Secrets, I met a Harvard Medical School professor who had discovered an amazing fact. There's a substance that causes cancer cells to activate new blood vessels so that they can get food. This phenomenon is called angiogenesis. Medical research has focused on finding how to block this unknown substance so that malignant growths can be deprived of nutrients and thus killed. The professor discovered that the exact opposite substance causes toxemia in pregnant women, a potentially fatal disorder in which the blood vessels are unhappy that they're undergoing normal programmed cell death. You realize what this means, he said with deep awe. The body can trigger chemicals in a balancing act between life and death, and yet science has totally ignored who or what is doing the balancing. Doesn't the whole secret of health lie in that part of ourselves, not in the chemicals being used? Doesn't the whole secret lie in the self? The fact that consciousness could be the missing ingredient, the X factor behind the scenes, came to him as a revelation. The mystics have prompted science here because one reads in many mystical traditions that every person dies at exactly the right time and knows in advance when that time is right. But I would like to examine more deeply the concept of dying every day. To die every day is a choice everyone overlooks. I want to see myself as the same person from day to day in order to preserve my sense of identity, especially ego identity. I want to see myself as inhabiting the same body every day because it is disturbing to think that my body is constantly deserting me. Yet it must. If I'm not to be a living mummy, then I need to keep changing my body as I change my clothes. Following the complex timetable of apoptosis, I'm given a new body via the mechanism of death. This process happens subtly enough that it passes without notice. No one sees a 2-year-old turning in her body for a new one at age 3, correct? You don't see that, and yet it's happening right before your eyes. Every day she has the same body, and yet she doesn't. Only the constant process of renewal, a gift of death, enables to keep pace with each stage of development. The wonder is that one feels like the same person in the midst of such endless shape-shifting. Unlike with cell death, I can observe my ideas being born and dying. To support the passage from childish thought to adult thought, the mind has to die every day. My cherished ideas die and never reappear. My most intense experiences are consumed by their own passions. My answer to the question, who am I, totally changes from age 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and so on, throughout life, all the way to dusty death. We understand death when we drop the illusion that life must be continuous. All of nature obeys one rhythm. The universe is dying at the speed of light, yet it still manages along the way to create this planet and the life forms inhabiting it. Our bodies are dying at many different speeds at once, beginning with the photon, ascending through chemical dissolution, cell death, tissue regeneration, and finally, the death of the whole organism. What are we so afraid of? Apoptosis rescues us from fear, I think. The death of a single cell makes no difference to the body. What counts is not the act, but the plan, an overarching design that brings the balance of positive and negative signals that every cell responds to. The plan is beyond time because it dates to the very construction of time. The plan is beyond space because it is everywhere in the body and yet nowhere. Every cell, as it dies, takes the plan with it, and yet the plan survives. In the one reality, you don't settle an argument by picking sides. Both sides of any argument are equally true. So I have no trouble conceding that what happens after death is invisible to the eye and cannot be proved as a material event. I concede without question that we normally don't remember our past lives and can live very well without the knowledge. If I ask you, what were you doing at 14 years old on a Thursday evening, you don't remember, and it's not important. Still, I don't understand how anyone can remain a materialist after seeing apoptosis at work. The case against life after death looks strong only if you ignore everything discovered about cells, photons, molecules, thoughts, and the whole body. Every level of existence is born and dies on its own timetable, from less than a millionth of a second to the probable rebirth of a new universe billions of years from now. The hope that lies beyond death comes from the promise of renewal. If you passionately identify with life instead of with the passing parade of forms and phenomena, death takes its rightful place as the agent of renewal. In one of his poems, Tagore asks himself, Tagore, the great Indian sage, poet, what will you give when death knocks at your door? His answer simply displays the untroubled joy of someone who has risen above the fear surrounding death. The fullness of my life, the sweet wine of autumn days and summer nights, my little hoard gleaned through the years, and hours rich with living. That will be my gift when death knocks at my door. So this is how we renew ourselves. I'll keep continuing on this theme, but I think we're making progress in understanding how death makes life possible. Let me know your thoughts.